Hey everyone. So we're coming to the end of a particularly busy summer, and if you're anything like me, you've been struggling to keep up with what needs to be done in your garden. My to-do list has literally grown longer than my arm. So what do? How do you keep up? Well, believe it or not, you can apply some of the tips from the self-help guru Stephen Covey to how you garden. How do you get everything done? I'll let you in on a secret. How do you manage to stay on top of everything that needs to be done? Well, here's the secret. You don't. But hold on, don't turn off the video just yet. All you A-type personalities, just listen for a second. Every gardener will tell you that in the middle of summer, there's always way more to be done than is usually possible to do. But honestly, you don't have to do it all. The secret is that winter is coming. There's a natural cycle to things that we need to make use of. And I'm not saying just leave everything and I go through the process on how to decide what to focus on now. But seriously, this is one of the things about learning to be a gardener. Sometimes you have to learn to live with the mess, if only just for a little while. And really, it's not about the mess, it's about living seasonally. And that's a life lesson, not just a gardening lesson. In Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he has this time management matrix with 4 quadrants. And the premise is that you should eventually aim to focus on quadrant 2 tasks, which are the not urgent but important, the sort of long-term goals. So let's look at how we can adapt this to stay on top of our gardening tasks. So off the top of my head, looking after a garden can be broken up into 7 main tasks. So that's cutting the grass on the edges, watering, weeding, pest control, feeding, pruning, and the miscellaneous things like looking after a compost pile or staking plants or splitting and transplanting. The problem is that all garden tasks are important, so there's not much to differentiate between them. But I would say there really are 3 categories. So there's non-negotiable, essential, and important. And depending on the time of year, it'll influence whether they are urgent or not. And of those, the first 2, I would say, are non-negotiable and urgent. So cutting your grass and watering. You can't really put off cutting your grass for long. The more regularly you cut your grass, the healthier it stays. Depending on the season and how dry it is, watering is as important. And depending on where you live, if it's a summer or a winter rainfall area, you may not be able to depend on the natural rain to keep everything alive. Remember, these are things you have to do, but you want to spend less time here eventually. You could look at hiring a gardener or a garden service to cut your lawn, or you could install an irrigation system. The second 2, weeding and pest control, are essential, but not necessarily urgent. And particularly with weeding, if you do things right, you can completely reduce the amount of work involved. With both of these, it's really about being vigilant. Keep a lookout for any plants that are not looking great or for early signs of damage from pests. Often if you can get in early, you can limit the damage or even completely eradicate the pest before it spreads to other plants. Weeds are like squatters. They're opportunists just looking for a neglected spot to exploit. An empty patch, a crack in the paving, or even a weak lawn. Basically anywhere there's real estate with no competition. And the trick with squatting, as I learned from some time backpacking around the UK, is to go unnoticed. If you can get by with no one seeing you for a month or so, then you can start to invite people over and eventually you get squatters' rights and it becomes increasingly difficult to get you out, or so I was told. Well, it's the same with weeds. Once they're established and start sowing seeds, you've got a long-term problem. So the trick is to discourage the squatters, the weeds in the first place. The best way to do this is with mulch. I've said this so many times. Bark, chips, stones, leaves, they all discourage the germination of the seeds in the soil. Planting other plants also helps to outcompete the weeds, and basically most seeds need a certain amount of warmth or light to germinate. So if you can reduce the amount of light getting down to the soil, then they won't germinate. The same applies to lawns, in that if your lawn is healthy and well fed, it'll leave little room for weeds to take root. The other trick with weeds is to just do a little bit at a time, but to stay on top of it. The last 3, feeding and pruning and the miscellaneous tasks, are all important, but they're not urgent. So if you're running out of time in the middle of summer, you can put these off for a couple of weeks at the most. Feeding your garden is probably the most neglected task by any gardener, especially here in Durban, where everything grows so easily. The temptation is just to put it off indefinitely. But if you don't feed your garden, you really won't get the best out of it. You won't see as many flowers or fruit, and plants will be more susceptible to diseases and pests, and that makes your job harder down the line. Lawns should be fertilized around about every 6 weeks, and flower beds probably every 6 to 8 weeks or so. Composting should be done at least once a year before or in early spring. Regular pruning, specifically of hedges, is also important. Otherwise, when you do get around to it, you have to be far more severe with your pruning. That's when you start to see through the hedges. Most other plants require seasonal pruning and usually after flowering, so most of the time you can hold off until winter. And unless there is a branch that will do imminent damage if you don't cut it, or you have something that will create too much shade and cause issues for the things growing underneath it, then just leave it for later. Tasks like feeding and pruning may not be urgent, but they're still important. By dividing these tasks up into the 3 categories, it's easier to assess what really is urgent. And during the height of summer, it makes it easier to decide what you can put off in the short term. But at the end of the day, the goal is to have a garden that you can enjoy. When there are tasks you don't enjoy that you can delegate, then just do it. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, just focus on the things that are non-negotiable. There'll be time down the line for the other things. That's seasonal living, and it's the way gardening works. But remember, the goal is happy gardening.